today. We are talking about time has no respect today. This is part 3 of the series called Confessions of a Prophet. And those are my confessions. I'm telling the stories of things that have happened in my life that helped me to be able to understand who God is, to know his ways, to know a little bit more about his thoughts, just to get a practical understanding who God is, because, I've always been curious about how this all worked. When I heard about being born again, I was really surprised. I was really shocked that you can be born again. I thought, what does that mean exactly? Now, as you already know, if you watch some of the other two parts, part 1 and part 2, I was a pretty bad little boy. I was not somebody who would really want to have to raise. In fact, I'm thankful God never gave me a son, so I don't have to raise myself, because that was quite a handful. And today, we're going to be talking about some of the years that started out right after my 6th birthday. And on my 6th birthday was the same year that I had an encounter with a young man that I mentioned in part 2, that I had struck with an open pistol, as a cap pistol, but it was jagged enough, and I must have hit him hard enough to do permanent damage to his face. And he had scars from the stitches. There were quite a few stitches put on both sides of his mouth. So I'm not sure how I did that at that young age, because he was much older than I, but that's what happened. And I felt no remorse for it. That was what was strange, because I didn't feel bad about it. In fact, I justified it by saying he pushed me in the street, which he did, but there was no justification for the damage I did to him. However, it did create a reputation that preceded me for the rest of my years in that particular town, which was Odessa, Texas. And Odessa, Texas is a pretty rough town. It's an oil town, and people come in from all over, and it's a pretty rough place. But I guess you might feared because of the things I did, even though I wasn't a big guy. Of course, first, second grade, I was bigger than most of them, but, everybody quickly outgrew me. But, after that event happened that summer, then, fall came around, and I was going to kindergarten. I didn't go to school, start elementary school until 7 years of age. But as that particular time came, I also had a great interest in knowing what was going on two streets down, which there was a Baptist church there. And I was really interested to know what was going on. A lot of people in the neighborhood would go. My parents didn't. I guess my parents weren't really interested in the things of God, or maybe they had their opinions about God that maybe didn't even exist. I don't really know. But I wanted to go find out. So, being my parents worked considerable lengthy hours starting up their own business, I found myself many times being brushed off to the sitter, staying from the morning until night, and they'd pick me up after they got off work. And when it came around to Sundays, that was their only day off. They usually slept in until lunchtime. So I'd sneak out in the mornings. I'd get dressed, and I'd put on the best clothes that I could find, and walk that 2 blocks down the street, and went down the halls, and saw all these people and different rooms, and found somebody and asked them, where am I supposed to go? And they asked how old I was, and so they walked me down to a room I was to go into, and that was Sunday school. So I'd go to the Sunday school class, and we'd get out somewhere around 10:30, and then I'd walk back home, because I'd see everybody going into this other building, which was the big building, the big church, and I was a little bit skittish about doing that, because I didn't know exactly what was going on in there. So I'd get home and change clothes before my parents ever woke up, so they never really knew what I was doing. But there came a time where I had a weekend with my grandmother, who lived about 60 miles away, and I got talking to her about going to church, and she was real interested to hear that, because she was a believer, and she went to Baptist church there in the town where she's at. And I asked her, I said, I wonder if I could go to that big church. She said, well, what are you talking about, the big church? She thought I was talking about another facility. I said, well, the one everybody goes to after Sunday school. She said, oh, well, yeah, you could go to there. She said, well, I don't really feel comfortable doing it by myself. She said, well, I tell you what, next Sunday I'll drive to where you're at, and I'll come to your house, and I'll pick you up. You just be ready, and we'll go to the big church. And I said, that's the deal. Well, she didn't pick me up at the house. She wound up picking me up right out of Sunday school, because I told her I was going to go to Sunday school, so I didn't want to have to go home and then have to ride back. So she waited for me. She found out what room I was going to be in, and as soon as I came out there, she stood like grandmothers, have a purse and their gloves and their little hat and, wearing their dress, and she was just a typical grandmother. And so she took me into the big church, and we sat, I don't know, probably about 7 rows back from the front, and there's probably about 200 people there. And it was a special event that was taking place that day. They had a young teenage evangelist that was coming in to preach the sermon that day. And, I thought, well, I didn't know the difference between a normal Sunday and not a normal Sunday, but this seemed to be pretty exciting. But it was James Robinson who was the preacher at that time. He was a teenager. Now, James Robinson's older than I by far. And, he was known as a up-and-coming evangelist at the particular time, and he's got a TV program. I think it's called Life, that you can find on the networks. But he was preaching that day, and, I don't know, it was kind of interesting how things began to change. As I had my eyes closed, I began to see just colors of purple and red, and I would see, and they would change, and I was wondering, why am I seeing these colors when I close my eyes? So I'd open my eyes and see if somebody walked by that was wearing red or purple, and they weren't. So I just thought, well, this is odd. Then all of a sudden, an overwhelming guilt began to fill my heart, and I felt so guilty, and all these things began to flow into my thoughts about things I'd done, including that young man that I hit with a pistol. And, I started feeling really bad about it, and because, well, at the same time, Reverend Robinson was talking about our sins and being forgiven of our sins, and he's talking about Jesus and how he died on the cross, and that's the only way you can have your sins forgiven. Well, I was really starting to perspire. I was worried about this thing. I didn't know what else to do. I'm listening to him, and he's talking about going to hell and all this, and I'm thinking, man, this is really serious business in this place. So he gave an opportunity for us to come up and receive Jesus. Well, unbeknownst to my grandmother, I got up and walked out down the aisle, went all the way up the front with a bunch of other people. And she was pleased, but at the same time, she was kind of surprised, because she didn't, know if I even understood what was going on. But I knew perfectly what was going on. I had to have my sins forgiven. And as soon as I gave my life to Jesus, I felt just as clean as I could be. I knew it was all gone. I knew that everything that I'd done wrong was clean under the blood now, and I felt like I was white as snow, clean as I could be, and I was happy. And my grandmother took me home and was going to get my parents to go out to eat, and of course she had to woke them up. She just scolded them up one side and down the other, because do you know what he's been doing? He's been sneaking out of the house every Sunday and going down to church. And they were, well, we didn't know it, They said, well, sure you didn't know it, But you know what happened today? And of course they were like, what? He did what? They didn't know if I did something wrong or did something good, because the way she's still angry at them, they didn't know. But later on they found out, and of course much later, in fact, the next summer, I was baptized in that same church, and then things began to really change. And then, comes along first grade. 7 years old, I didn't want to do first grade. I didn't want to go to school. I didn't want anything to do with that. I like to play. I mean, because I lived in a neighborhood where we had, at any given time, there were 7 to 9 kids, and we'd all gang up around the neighborhood there, and we'd do all kinds of things. Usually it was playing war, and the girls were the nurses, and, us guys were running down the fences. We had center block fences, which it gives you a good footing. It's not some wood fence. It's a heavy concrete fence, so you could run up and down those fences and jump off them into somebody's backyard and go hide. So we were always trying to find each other, and we'd divide up, and it was a lot of fun, just playing like kids, and we drank out of the water hose and everything, just like we used to do. But it was more amazing, I guess, that all of our parents really didn't worry about us. I mean, we lived in town, but there's cars running up and down the streets, and there was a busy street, just 2 doors down from where I lived. that you didn't want to be caught running across that street without looking both ways, that's for sure. But we play out there, and our parents didn't think much about it. It was just you go play, and about the time the sun started going down, you'd hear somebody's dad get out there and start whistling for them, and they'd come home like a dog, whistling for a dog. And then somebody come out there, and you hear some lady hollering for their kid, and they'd go home. And usually I was the last one where my mother or dad would come out hollering for me, and I'd come in, and then we'd, spend the rest of the evening in the house, which usually was dark, and then get ready for what was going to happen the next day. So when we started school, that was just boring as all get out. I have to sit there and listen to that teacher talking about stuff you weren't interested in. You didn't, care anything about what you're saying. At least I didn't. And I found it very challenging, very difficult to sit still for that long of time and listen to all that stuff that I didn't really know how that's going to help me at all. I really wasn't even looking for help when you came and found me, but I found out real fast I didn't have a choice. I had to be there. So I felt like, well, I'm in prison here. This is against my will. I felt like I had been violated. But that kind of set a precedence for what I considered school to be for many years. And through the first grade, I found out that, I was a pretty large boy. I mean, I was tall. I was husky. I'd played a lot, built up some muscle for even a 7-year-old. And I had some Davy Crockett suspenders. And the reason why they're called Davy Crockett suspenders, I had a little disc that slid up and down to adjust it. And there was a picture of Davy Crockett on there. So that was really important. And I'd like to, me and another boy, we'd like to go out at recess, and when all the kids started running in to the building, we'd see them coming, and we would stick our foot out and trip them and watch them fall. We thought that was funny. Well, it didn't take long before the conviction of God came in my heart, and I decided, well, this isn't any fun. This isn't good. This is not what Jesus wants. So I went through a lot of changes of being taught by God early on. There wasn't many people around a family to tell me what I was doing wrong or what I was doing right. So I kind of had to learn along the way. Then come second grade, it wasn't too much different, same school. But there was a teacher, there was also the PE coach, and he came to give me some favor in his way. He kind of liked the way I was, I guess. And we had what you call tetherball, and that's where you had a round ball that was kind of soft. Sometimes you get aired up pretty hard. It'd be pretty straight like a soccer ball. And it was tied on a rope, and the rope went to the top of the pole, and the whole idea was one guy stands on one side of the pole and one on the other, and you keep hitting it to try to wrap the pole around the ball around the pole, and whoever got around there first won. So you got one trying to defend, one to hit, and if you miss, it went over your head, and there were all the different kinds of tricks to get that ball past that person. And the coach took it upon himself to rename me to San Quentin Quincy, and I thought that was cool. I had no idea what it meant, San Quentin Quincy, until I learned about San Quentin prison, and then I realized that wasn't a good thing. He was already, I guess you might say, prophesying into my life. You're going to go to prison, son. And I felt like, that at the time I thought it was a great thing, but it really wasn't. And then third grade come along. I really just went blank. Like I've told you, I remember a lot of things way back, even when I was couldn't even walk. I remember things, but not everything, but a few things. And, but third grade just went totally blank. And I've never, to this day, can't even remember what my teacher's name was, even where I went to school, because we did move around quite a bit. And the reason for that was because of the fourth grade. The summer before my fourth grade was the year that my mother was killed in an accident that took her life. And, that was kind of a story that kind of began a lot of things for me, because my sister, who was at the time 2 years old and I was 9, we were staying at my grandmother's, the same grandmother that came to take me to the big church in Big Spring, Texas, where she lived. And we'd been there a couple of weeks. My parents were on vacation from my sister and I guess you might say. And so one evening, they called, and we were in the house, my sister and I, and my grandmother, and my grandmother was on the phone, and she began to talk to my dad and about them coming to pick us up that night. And it began to drizzle, a little bit of rain, not much, but just enough to know it was raining. And I don't know how, but out of that rain, God spoke, and God told me that there was going to be an accident, and it would be fatal. That my parents would be in an accident, and it'd be fatal. Well, I tried like everything to get my grandmother to let me talk to my parents, and she wouldn't let me on the phone. And then I'm trying to be patient, but at the same time, I'm being very aggressive about trying to want to talk to them. And then she finally hung up. And I said, why didn't you let me talk to them? She said, well, you're going to be here in an hour. And I said, no, they're not. They're going to have a wreck. Well, she thought I was just nervous or didn't want to go home, or, didn't want to see them right away, or want to do it another day, or whatever the reason was. But I told her just point blank, no, they're going to be in a wreck. In fact, I believed it so much because it was so strong, his word to me, that I began to walk around the house and praying under my breath, and sometimes just in my head I was praying. One point I went to the front door, on the inside of the front door, and I leaned on it with my head on my arm, and I started trying to remember things I'd learned in Sunday school, and I remembered about the visions that the old prophets had, and some of the things that they had seen. So I began to try to envision in my head, trying to convince God that this needs to happen, Lord. They just need to run off the road. They're not going to have a wreck. Just run off the road. It's not going to be bad at all. Nobody's going to die. And of course, I kept pleading with God, don't let this happen. And 20 minutes after that phone call, and me going around the house praying, my dad's 4 brothers come walking in the house. Well, I knew something was wrong, because that was not normal. And they come in, they're kind of quiet and kind of whispering around, and so I go over and stand in the hallway looking into the kitchen where one of my uncles got on the telephone, and I found out later that what I thought he was doing at the time was calling the hospital in Odessa to find out about the wreck and about what room my dad was in. And I think I know he used that time just to try to break the news, because nobody wanted to walk up and tell me that my mom just died in a car wreck. They just couldn't bring themselves to do it, I guess. So they did it that way, and my uncle got on the phone and started talking to somebody on the other line like he was talking to somebody, and asking them what room. He already knew what room they were in and everything, but he said, well, he act like they were having trouble figuring out who he was talking about. He said, well, they were just in a wreck, and Moselle Simpson died in that wreck, and that's when I found out my mama died, and my dad was still in the hospital. Well, I really broke down, because I knew, it was going to happen before, and I was just, consumed by grief. And my little sister, she's 2 years old, she's turning around, patting me on the stomach, saying, it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay. And my dad's youngest brother was standing right behind me. Now, he's an adult, he's got kids too, and he's got his hands on my shoulder, and I know he's broken up, because he could feel my sorrow, he could feel my pain. And my sister didn't know what was going on. I told her so. I said, you don't understand what's just happened. You can't possibly understand what's just happened. And so we all got in our cars, and there's probably 2 or 3 cars that we caravan 60 miles to Odessa, where they were in the hospital. As soon as we came through the hospital, into the entry of the hospital, there was a lady off on the side over there that had blood on her dress and laughing and carrying on evidently. Well, what actually happened was she was with a man that wasn't her husband, and they had been drinking, and they pulled out on the highway, which they didn't have interstates then, but they had a divided highway, and they pulled down the wrong way, going the wrong way, and hit my parents head on. But I knew that she was the one driving the car. I just knew it. And I was going to run over there and give her a piece of my mind. Of course, my uncle grabbed me, and they all kind of dared off over at him. All my family did, like, we know who you are, kind of put them on notice. So we left him alone. We went up to see my dad, and he's pretty shook up, pretty much a wreck. And scratched up pretty bad. But my point is that started something brand new in my life. Now, I was born again at 6 years of age, baptized the summer before I turned 7. Then I go through a couple of years of school, and then the summer before my 4th grade, my mom's killed in that car wreck, and I'm wondering, how in the world did I know that? Even my grandmother later on, she said, "You remember that night?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I remember well." And she said, "How did you know that?" I said, "Grandma, I don't know. I really don't know." So she said, "We need to ask a pastor about it. You need to ask your pastor about it." I said, "Okay." So when the opportunity came, I asked my pastor if he could give me a little moment to ask him a question. Now, I told him the circumstances, what happened, the whole story, just like I told you. And he said, "Well, son, that was the devil. That was the devil. You don't want to listen to that voice anymore." And I thought, wow, that was the devil? And I guess he assumed because something bad happened, it had to be the devil. Well, later I found out that wasn't the devil, but it took me a long time to find out because, you see, at the time, there wasn't any church I could go to. There was no minister I knew of that I could go to and tell him I heard God's voice, and he told me this. I mean, you just didn't tell people you heard God. They'd think you're just nuttier than a bat. They'd want to put you in a white straitjacket and put you in a sane asylum. They thought there was something wrong with you. So, I had to kind of be careful growing up, about those kind of things. But I didn't want to abandon it, but I want to find out what it was. So I started looking into everything I could find. Somebody talked about ESP, extra sensory perception. So I started looking into that. Well, that didn't feel right. Then clairvoyance. I looked in that. Well, that didn't seem quite right either. I struggle with that, trying to figure out, okay, well, what is this? Now, I continue to keep hearing God speaking to me along the way, and I'll tell you some of those ways as we go through these various parts of the series. But this particular one was the one that really highlighted. Now, God had talked to me before. We talked about that when I was younger and asking God why I made feet so ugly and, that conversation and other things that would take place. But this was something on a much different plane. This was expanded my purview of the whole thing about hearing God. Because, there was a conversation going on in my head, and it wasn't just crazy talk. It wasn't just me. It was somebody speaking to me, and I knew it. But that night that I heard God in that way, and in that rain, that little bit of a drizzle coming down, which, in that part of the world, they don't get but about 16 to 20 inches a year of rain. So that's not very much. Pretty dry place. So it's exceptionally unusual. But out of that, God spoke to me. And I realized that I've got to find out what this is. I don't know. At the time, I didn't know if it was God or not because I've already been told it was the devil. So I'm really confused. And I began to, search it out. And I began to keep asking. But every time I'd hear that voice or get that unction from him to do something, it always worked out. It was always the right thing. It never did fail me. So whatever this is, I got to know what it is. I don't know what it is because nobody's talking about God speaking. Nobody's talking about hearing God. So, it's all about something we do. It was like the whole body of Christ believed that Jesus did die on the cross and he left us a book and put us in charge. And that was it. And everybody talked in a manner that just seems to be the way it is. Things just happen. Well, I figured things happen for a reason, but what's the reason? How can we know in advance? How can we know what's going to happen next? Oh, nobody knows. Time has no respect. I mean, the fact is, even when you give a prophecy, time will test it. Time will test it to see if it's true. You can't really even judge a prophecy until it's come to pass because you don't have a clue even what it's even talking about. You might think you do, but really you won't know the truth of it until it's come to fulfillment. And then you'll understand. The same thing began to work in my life. I kept pressing to find out where this was, but I wasn't asking the voice that was telling me all these other things along the way. Even at the time where I became of age to really begin to learn more about spiritual things, we moved. and we moved to a place in New Mexico that was even more desolate, more backwards, and there wasn't anybody there that I knew that knew anything at all about God. In fact, I didn't even know a church I could go to. In fact, there was the 2 years that I lived in New Mexico, I couldn't even go to church. I didn't have a car. I wasn't old enough to drive, and so I was just kind of stuck. I was a lot further away from my grandmother and my aunt and uncle, who were spiritual mentors in my life, and I just was kind of lost. But I still, tried to do what I could do to entertain myself and have fun. And I didn't really hear God very much through that period of time in my life. And I don't know exactly why, but it came around to the time we got to 7th grade. That was the beginning of junior high. Now, I was all ready to become a student in junior high and take on some football, learn football, and I was excited about going to the school I was going to go to. And then we got to move back to Odessa. Now, I moved 5 times from Odessa, and I hadn't been back in a number of years, but because every time I did, something seemed to happen. But so we went back to Odessa, and then the 7th grade, I started out at a junior high there, and that's where I saw the boy again that I'd hit in the face with a gun, as I mentioned in part 2. And but there was a lot of things that happened during that time. When I came back to Odessa, everybody had pretty much outgrown me, but everybody still remembered and feared my name. And I thought, well, this is odd. Why is everybody so scared of me? Well, there had been a number of bigger boys, older boys that I had taken down. I'd fought a lot, I'm not proud of that, but I did. And, they just really were scared of some of the things I did, probably more about the guy that got hit with the gun in the face than any of the others. But there were some others that were also broadcasting my name around as far as somebody not to mess with. So, I really kind of felt like, gosh, people don't like me. People are scared of me. And, I really didn't want to be that way anymore because I was a Christian, you see. But, I didn't give that opportunity. And so at that time in Odessa, it was a very short period of time, because then we up and moved to Abilene, which was another 120 miles away. But that was the best move that ever could have happened for me. I mean, there I began to meet some friends some people that really were Christian. In fact, Abilene at the time was a dry town. And when you say a dry town, it means they didn't sell beer, wine, alcohol, not anywhere in the whole city. You had to go to another town to buy anything. Now, if it was damp, that meant it sold beer and wine, but they didn't sell hard liquor. But if the town's wet, that meant it sold everything, all the hard liquor, beer, wine. So Abilene was a Christian town. There was Abilene Christian College, which was Church of Christ, Hardin-Simmons, which was Baptist, McMurray College, McMurray University, which was Methodist. So you can see this was very much a Christianized town. And I had a lot of respect for the people there, and I really enjoyed having people that I could trust, and people that were honest, and people that were forthright and did things the right way, and really showed a measure of love and friendship that I had never experienced before in my life. And so I really became very bound to be part of that community. I was accepted. I did well in football, and moved up quite rapidly in that particular city, and my friends were real close. We were real tight. And, for the 8th, 9th grade, 10th grade, 3 years in one place was a long time for me. And I felt like I was going to be there forever. Now, in the 10th grade, our football team, which was a level 5 high school, which meant that it was the top of the largest high schools there were, we went to state that year, and we lost by 1 point. But at the same time, just me and one other boy were moved up from the junior varsity to the varsity, and were able to go to the playoffs and be a part of it. However, I didn't make the playoffs, because what happened now was something even more of a situation that prepared me for something I didn't want to have to live through. And that was, my dad had remarried a year after we lost my mom. So by the time fourth grade came around, I had a stepmother. And by the time, the fifth grade came, we were, she was about to have a child. And by the sixth grade, she did have a child. Seventh grade, she's gotten a little older. And by the time I'm in the eighth grade, my little half-sister is 3 years old. And then by the time I was in the ninth grade, she was 4. But when she was 2, they had diagnosed her with leukemia. So from the time she was born till she was 4 years old, right after she was born, God told me, he says, don't get too close. And I thought, what do you mean, don't get too close? Now, you got to remember, I didn't know that was God. But that voice I was always listening to told me, don't get too close to her. And I thought, what does that mean, don't get too close to her? And then it didn't take me too long to understand, don't get too attached. Don't let your whole heart go out. And but I loved her. I spent time with her, a babysitter, or I took her places and did things with her. All my friends knew who she was. But, by the time I got to 10th grade, she wasn't doing too good. And I had an old red Jeep, and I'd put her in that Jeep with me, and I'd go ride around to all my friends, and they all knew her. And she was so well versed in communication because she had only been around adults pretty much. And she had learned, my stepmom was a school teacher, and she taught her how to write her name, how to do the alphabet, and she spoke very good English. Well, she spoke English, but she spoke it very fluently. And she was well versed in a lot of different things and knowledge. And, she had a little wig on because she was going through all that chemo stuff. And it was a time where, I really loved her, but God kept warning me, don't get too close. And then about the time the football season to go to that playoff game, and that was in December of 67, and she passed away, and we had to have the funeral. So I was not able to go to the playoffs, which was not that big a deal to me because it was a lot more serious to be at the funeral. And I had prepared myself, and I felt like I could handle it. And I was sitting on the front row with my mom, my stepmom, my dad, and my little sister, who at the time now was getting up in years. She was a little older. And, we all knew what was going on. And, I kept it together. I wasn't crying or anything until we got up, to go past the coffin where she was to give her, you say your last final rites or whatever you want to call it. And so I turned around and started walking out down the aisle to go out the back door. And I looked, and there was all these kids from school. I mean, there was probably 50, 60 kids. They were lined up even outside. You could see them standing outside along the sidewalk there where we're going to come walking out. It tore me up. I just really broke down. I mean, I didn't fall on the floor or anything, but I couldn't hold the tears back anymore because they were all crying. And I was not crying. I was feeling, like I can deal with this. I can deal with this. I kept just, keeping a stiff upper lip, as they say in England. And as we went through, I realized how much these kids had, fallen in love with my little sister. And it was an important time. But here again, that voice told me that I shouldn't get too close because it was preparing me not to get my heart torn out too badly, and it kind of went through that process. It was really hard on my parents because it was my stepmom's first child, and it really affected her the rest of her days. And then, by the time the 10th grade came along and went through that year, we got to the 11th grade, and before we even started the football season, we were in what they call two-a-days. We had to go to practice in the morning and practice in the afternoon. And you did that for a couple of weeks before the season started. So then you'd be in your regular, because school would start too, and so you could only practice once a day. So we're trying to get us in shape for the season. And I was going to be a starter that year on the varsity team. And then my dad picks me up one day at school, and he says, Well, I got something to tell you. Well, he picked me up after practice, after 2-day practices. He said, we're going to be moving back to Odessa. And I thought, what? We're going to move back to Odessa? When? He said, well, just here pretty quick. And I thought, oh, no, man, I'm going to have to go back there. I've just got all these friends here. And, I'm really good at football. I'm getting a lot of acknowledgement from that. And, scouts are beginning to watch me. And, my dad just, well, that's what we're going to do, And I felt like, this just isn't right. You're going to make a decision about my life and without even caring or consoling me. That was just something you're going to do. But that's the way it was back then. Mom, Dad did whatever they wanted to do, and, just tough luck, So I was kind of upset about it. My dad knew I was upset about it. So he went around behind my back and talked to the coach. And the coach had a daughter that was in the same grade I was. And the coach agreed to raise me for the rest of my years in school. I'd just come live with them there in Abilene, and as my parents would leave and go to Odessa, I'd be left there with the coach. And I thought, wait a minute, no, my coach, he's going to be too strict on me. I'll be in bed by 8:30 every night and up by 6. I said, hey, I can't do anything. I don't want to live in under somebody else's roof, under somebody else's rules. I don't really know them. I just know the coach, and I don't even know the coach that well. But he was willing to do that to keep me, but I just couldn't do it. So I moved, and that began to change a lot of things for me, because then I'm back in a place where I can't play football because I'm ineligible. You got to live there for a year before you can play football. So I wasn't going to be able to even play my senior year because we were already too far into the year. And, it just left me kind of dumbfounded of what to do, and I felt abandoned. I felt angry. I felt like I had been just totally turned against by everything and everyone. And I rebelled because of that. I turned against a lot of things. And I don't know that I really could say I turned against God, but my lifestyle was not what it was when I was in Abilene in that Christian environment. Now I'm back into that hardcore, oil patch, roughneck mentality where people fought frequently. I mean, it was just something that just seemed to happen a lot. And so I grew up the rest of my years there, and I wound up having a friend who was rather close to me. And the way we met was we had a mutual friend that lived down the street from where I lived, and I didn't even know of this boy until my friend that lived down the street invited me to come over one afternoon. And he comes over, and we didn't like each other at all. I mean, we didn't like each other's looks. So we go out in the front yard, and man, we're putting, just duking it out. And we wound up giving up. I think we just tired out. I don't think you say either one of us won. We were, both messed up. But, after that, we became the closest of friends. We became real close. In fact, we wound up going to college together and rooming together and taking the same classes together, working at the same job. And then a few years later, we both got married at the same time. Our firstborn child were the same year, and they were both girls. So, we still stay in contact today after all these years. But it's kind of interesting how, you can spar with somebody like that and become a close friend after having a battle. That just makes no sense whatsoever. But it does say in the Bible in Proverbs that iron against iron sharpens the countenance of a friend. Well, there was some iron flying. There was some sparks flying too. And, we were having that fist fight, and out of that, we turned out to be closest of friends. So it's kind of weird how things happen. It wasn't until after I graduated from high school, and the year I graduated, there was 1,670-something kids graduated just from senior class that year. So it was a good-sized high school. I graduated from Permian High School, which was a football team that even, in fact, they made a movie about our school. It's called Friday Night Lights, and it's about Permian High School there in Odessa, how football was everything. Football was the big deal. High school football is big in Texas. I'm sure it is in other states too, but it was exceptionally big because there was so much pressure put on you to do well. I'm kind of glad that I missed out on the ability to be able to play football in that school, because a lot of people's lives were really wrecked because of what they were put through. A lot of things happened that I didn't find out until later, after I saw the movie Friday Night Lights, that that was pretty much true. Everything that was in there from the people I know, and if you saw the movie or read the book, you would understand what I'm talking about, what that city was like. So we go on to the point where I was through my senior high. Now I'm going to go to college, and Tommy and I, my best friend, we were going to go to college there in Odessa, and we did, and we worked in the newspaper office for the years that we were going to college, and we got into some things we shouldn't have. We did a lot of things we shouldn't have, but I never did really get locked into the drug scene like a lot of kids did. I saw a lot of kids do a lot of things that I saw them die. I mean, they were just terrible. Things were real hard back in that. The Vietnam War was going, and I had friends that went to Vietnam, came back. I was wanting to join the Marines, but three of my friends came back, and one of them was in Marines and two others were in the Army, and they backed me in a corner, and they threatened me with an inch of my life if I even considered about going and signing up. So I thought, well, there's something going on. They told me, you don't want to do that, man. I thought it was the right thing to do, but they talked me out of it. Well, I wasn't drafted, and my number came up because we went to a lottery draft. So if your number was low when you were 21 years to 18 years, you were going to probably be called up if you're in a low number. My number was 258, so that was every day of the year they would call out the numbers of the people that were in that group. So if your number is 2, everybody that was in that age bracket of 21 to 18, you're going to get called up to go serve, whether you want to or not. That was kind of the fast forward, how you might say, through my elementary, my junior high and high school days, and into college. I'll start next week on college and some of the things that we had found ourselves into that really led to some very damaging things to some people's lives. It was a hard time for me for a lot of reasons, but one thing I got to keep in mind and to keep you in focus is that it doesn't matter what you've gone through or what you've done. Whatever you do, God already has known that you would do it. But what you do afterwards determines whether you're going to follow him or not. Meaning, if you know you're doing something wrong and you're trying to fight it and you can't get rid of it, you can't shake it. I can't get rid of the drugs. I can't get rid of the alcohol. Whatever it is, you have to give it to God. He knows that there's powers. He knows there's temptations. He knows there's demonic activity, and you're trying to fight it. If you're not a Spirit-filled Christian, it's a really hard place to be, because you know you're born again, but you don't, and that's great. You've been forgiven of your sins, but you have not received the baptism of the Holy Spirit. You don't have the power to overcome the things that will come at you, things that will challenge you. And if you don't hear God, you're really having a hard time. But I heard the voice of God even before I was born again, even before I was baptized in the Holy Spirit. So being baptized in the Holy Spirit doesn't make you hear God. What makes you hear God is wanting to hear God. And wanting to hear God means that you're going to want to do something about what he says. You got to trust that voice. I've heard many people describe the Holy Spirit as a gut feeling, or just had an odd experience that I think maybe this is what made me do this, or I just had a hunch, or they use the Holy Spirit for a lot of different interpretations. But when you really learn who it is that's giving you all that direction that turns out to be good, then you realize you're not as smart as you think you are. And all those ideas that you had weren't really your ideas at all. It was from one who is watching over you and sharing great things in your life. I want you to know that Jesus died on the cross for you. And even though it was some 2,000 years ago, he still has the blood shed for you. And anytime you're doing something you feel like, God, I need some help here, go to the cross leave it there, turn from it, and ask God for the power to overcome it. Whatever it is, just ask God to take it from you, because he knows of our weakness. But in our weakness, he'll make us strong. But you have to believe. A lot of people believe they just got born again and whatever sins were forgiven then. Everything they acquire after that in sinful activity, they're stuck with it. Not so. That's a lie. Don't buy that lie. You are forgiven over and over and over and over. What did he say? 7 times 70. You know, you got to realize that if you can forgive yourself, you have conquered your path and kept the devil out, because that's the only thing he can hold you back with is guilt. Guilt is a sad thing. Grief is a horrible thing. But do not grieve over your past. Do not grieve over your even present. Just know God's already has your name written in the Lamb's Book of Life, and it can't be erased. It can't be removed. Nothing erases the blood of Jesus. Nothing. So you don't worry about your eternal salvation. You just work out your salvation in this life. And the way you do that is just keep going to Jesus and asking him to give you forgiveness, give you power to overcome. And he will. But you got to want it. You got to want it. You know, if you try to deliver somebody from something that is destroying their life and they don't want to, you're just wasting your time. You're casting pearls before swine, and they'll turn on you. But if you really have somebody, and even including yourself, you really, really want to be forgiven, you want to be set free, then just ask Jesus, please, Jesus, give me the power. Take this from me, and he will. I don't care what it is. I don't care how bad it may be. I don't care how much guilt you're carrying. You can be set free of that. But you got to learn first to give it to Jesus and then forgive yourself of it. He's not going to hold you accountable, because once he's forgiven, it's forgiven. Don't even talk to me about it, he says, because I've already forgiven it. I don't even know what you're talking about. I cast it as far as east is to west. Into the deepest of oceans, you'll never find it. It's gone. So don't remind me of it. It's over with. I'm talking about these things to help you also realize that God can use anybody. And if you think I had a perfect life to get to the place to where I have the ability to be able to hear God for others, and see the miracles and signs and wonders and visions and all those things, no. It's not because of my perfect life. It's because I desire to be as close to God as I can be. But there's times that I fail, and there's times that I feel bad about it for just a little bit, just long enough to say, God, forgive me, take this from me, please, Lord, and I go on. Because it's not determined how many times you fail, it's how many times you get up that makes success come into your life. And that goes for a lot of things, and especially those things of God. I hope you're blessed today. I hope you realize that we're headed with this somewhere. I'm going somewhere with this, and it will be a compilation that will begin to be put into a book later on. And I just want you to be prepared for some of the things that are coming. I don't want to lose you. I want you to keep loving me. Even if I tell you all the ugly stuff I've done, you will know that you can be free too. So be it. God bless you. Amen.